I've had the pleasure of being involved with NAS for a few years now. I started my engagement with NAS as a fellow in the Chief Executive Officers Program, and I've also been a mentor in the Community House. So I'm really excited to be talking to all of you today about creative placemaking as it relates to community development. Some of my other colleagues are going to talk about more detailed work, and I'm going to sort of come at it from a higher level approach just to talk to you a little bit about how we've been working with community development artists at LISC. These things are all sort of LISC examples, but some of the work has started before we started to invest. So I don't want to take credit for any of the work of these artists. They've been doing this work for a long time in community, and you're going to see some great examples today. So LISC started its investments in arts and culture 30 years ago when we first started as an organization. We worked really closely with community developers to invest in artist housing, to renovate theater spaces, to create community facilities, and arts and culture. So arts and culture has always been part of our program of lending. We lend money and capital to organizations on the ground to create these spaces. About 3.5 years ago, we started thinking about what would happen if we actually intentionally incorporated artists into our program, and started a program called Creative Placemaking at LISC that brings artists and community developers together to look into their neighborhoods and figure out what role artists can play in the work. We've really concentrated on a very clear value statement, and that value statement has really allowed us to be effective and to be consistent as we approach community development and artists working together. I encourage all of you to think about that a little bit too in your own work. Is like, what values are you bringing to the table, and what values are your partners bringing to the table, and be really intentional about talking about your value statements with each other. That really does keep things going forward as you start to come into problems or have challenges in the work. You go back to those values, and people really are able to come to the table and talk about why you're there and continue the work together. I've seen those values really be important in the work that we've done so far in the last couple of years and in the past. The core values of creative placemaking at LISC are the following. Artists as leaders, as catalysts and change makers. So how do artists work in community, and how do we empower artists to really be catalysts and change makers in community development? We have a real strong value around racial equity. How are residents in our disinvested neighborhoods involved in the work? What is their role in making decisions? Are they at the center of the creation and co-creation with artists? That's really important. By making sure that people's voices are heard, we end up with projects that people feel ownership of and they really feel authorship of. And in that end, also create some agency for our residents. We're really clear about development without displacement. How can we develop our neighborhoods so that it benefits the people who live there now and does not displace them? There'll be more about that in another section. And then what we're looking for in our projects is community-driven, comprehensive, and collaborative change. So artists working with people who live in our neighborhoods, working with our community developers all together, maybe public safety, maybe the city government, all coming together to be collaborative in the change and everyone sort of moving forward together. And then the other and most important sort of value is that we cultivate inherent community assets. We look for assets in neighborhoods. We look at cultural assets in neighborhoods and try to find ones that, if with just a little more investment or some capacity building, could really sort of go to the next level and really have even broader impact in their neighborhoods. Some of these organizations have been there for 40 years, others are younger and newer, but how do we help the existing assets in the neighborhood develop and grow? And so those are our core values at LISC around creative placemaking.